Okay, so we're just about a minute before we start. It looks like we have one more trustee joining us, as well as the county superintendent. And Chair Holland, I'll have the flag ready to share on my screen for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Just unmuted. Thank you.
Okay, welcome everyone. It looks like we've got the usual attendees, so we may not need our normal Zoom how-to, but just in case for a reminder, if you need to start or stop your video, you're just going to hover at the bottom of the left-hand corner of your screen where you can mute and unmute yourself or start or stop your video. If you need to raise your hand, you're going to click on the participants icon so that you can raise your hand. And if you need to make a chat, there's an icon for chat at the bottom of the screen as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chair Holland to start the meeting.
Okay, I will call the meeting to order. And as I indicated before we formally started, I will keep my video off because I have to move my computer closer to me, and it presents an odd photo so that people can hear me. So I will call the meeting to order, welcome everyone, and then I will take roll. So in case anyone, although I don't see anyone at this time, is listening to the meeting by phone so that they would understand who's here. I'm here, Trustee Abgaris. I see him nodding, so he's here.
I'm here.
Thank you. Trustee Decker?
Yes, I'm here.
Trustee Lorenzen wasn't able to be at her computer, so she's not here. Trustee McDonald? I see that she's here, but I don't see that she's responding. So I'm going to assume she's here, but her mic is on mute. Trustee Mercer? And Trustee Mercer is also on mute.
I'm here, but
Okay, thank you, Trustee Mercer. Trustee Smith? See him saying he's here. Trustee Sturbis?
I'm here.
Thanks.
I'm here.
Thank you. Trustee Vogel? I haven't seen that she's on yet.
Trustee Vogel has not joined yet.
Okay. And Trustee Wake?
I'm here.
Great. So now if we can stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance, and Dr. Watson, would you mind saying it for us so that we're not all talking over each other?
You bet. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. Now we're on to agenda item number 3, which is to review, revise, and approve the agenda. Are there any requests from any trustees to modify the order in which we will be discussing items during the meeting, or to otherwise revise the agenda? And please either raise your virtual hand or your real hand. I'm not seeing any hands being raised.
Chair Holland, I also wanted to identify in the roll call that Trustee Oldperson is also present at the meeting.
Oh, sorry, Trustee Oldperson.
Yep, we just had a little typo, but she is present here.
Yes, and I was reading from the agenda. Usually I read from the list of people. So I apologize, Trustee Oldperson, for the oversight. Thank you so much for catching that, Hatton. So now we move on to item number 4, which is to approve the minutes from the Board of Trustees regular meeting from May 12th, 2020, which are found beginning on page 4. Does anyone have any requests for any modifications to those minutes? Please raise your hand in some fashion. I'm scrolling down just to make sure. Not seeing any hands being raised physically or virtually. So is there a motion to approve the minutes from the May 12th board meeting? And here I've got, let me just see. Trustee Wake has moved to approve the minutes, seconded by Trustee Oldperson. All those in favor, please type in yes or Y, so we have a record of your vote. And let me scroll through chat. It is unanimous as to all trustees present. And so then we move on to 4B, which is the regular meeting for May 26, 2020. Are there any modifications that anyone would like to request for those minutes? Let me just scroll down to see if any hands are raised. Seeing none, then is there a motion to approve? And let me, it looks like. And Trustee Wake has moved to approve the minutes of May 26, seconded by Trustee Oldperson. All those in favor, please type in yes or Y or a yes in the chat. And that allows me to count those who are voting. And it appears that it is unanimous as to all trustees present. So now we move on to public comment regarding non-agenda items. This is the part of the meeting where the public can provide public comment for the board to listen to on items that we will not be discussing tonight. And so we ask 3 things. 1, if you can state your first and last name and spell your either first or last name if it has an unusual spelling. 2, if you're with an organization, identify the organization. And 3, limit your comments to 3 minutes. So if anyone wants to make public comment, either raise your hand or unmute yourself, and Hatton will help me look to see if anyone's doing that. And I just went through the 28 participants, and I currently do not see any hands raised. So we'll move on to correspondence, and there was no written public comment received since the last meeting. And so now we turn it over to you, Dr. Watsons, for announcements from the superintendent.
All right, thank you, Chair Holland, and thank you, trustees. I have a few extra items this evening, so I apologize. It might be just slightly longer than in my typical superintendent report, but I do want to take a minute for a couple of special things. So the first item that I would like to discuss, I'm going to share my screen if I can. Hopefully I won't crash the Zoom meeting in the process. And I'm going to draw everyone's attention to our website for just a minute. I think it is appropriate and to discuss briefly, the situations that exist outside of our schools right now, and the public dissent and issues around race and equity. I do want everyone to understand that these are difficult times, not only for our persons of color, but also just lots of folks in our communities that are hurting and are frustrated and angry. And we as a school district recognize that. We feel like it's our responsibility to listen and learn from these experiences and make sure that that we're doing everything we can within our district to address this issue. So I actually sent this out last week, and then we decided to put it on our website as well. But one of the things that I just wanted to call the board's attention to is a particular policy that actually has been around for a long time. It's nothing new, but there's been modifications to it over the years. But basically, the reason that I wanted to address this is I think it really clearly outlines our commitment to equity. And when I say equity, what I'm discussing is really equal access of opportunities for students, regardless of their race or skin color or national origin or a variety of different things that are in this list. So when you see this, I just want you to consider that, you know, we have a lot of great educational programs in our district, and what's important for us as educators, and something we don't ever want to forget, is that it's our jobs to make sure that there's equal access for all students, regardless of anything that might be considered a barrier or might be considered less than. It's really not in our eyes. So our job is to make sure that we do have equity in our schools and we have equal access to these rich opportunities. And to that end, I just want to be clear that we're committed to this. Not only is it board policy, but to be honest with you, as an educator, this is something that all of us strive to do, and what we work towards is making sure that we're providing equal access to students, regardless of their circumstances or particular differences. And what's really amazing to me is that the commitment goes beyond this. This is a great goal to strive for. I don't think we're there yet, but we really are trying to work towards this equity issue. And we know that, you know, issues of discrimination really are a barrier for our students. They're a barrier to accessing these educational opportunities. And so what our job is as leaders and as educators is to really examine what those barriers are and do our best to remove those barriers through processes or procedures or acknowledgments. It's important to me that we understand the barriers. So not only are we committed to equity, but we're committed to this notion of learning and listening, continuing on that continual learning path. As an educator, I believe I've never stopped learning, and I continue to be that listener and learn what I can do differently and how my actions can be perceived differently, or what I need to do to change that perception. So I think all of us are on that same path in our district. We're all on that learning and listening path and trying to understand what we can do to make the situation better for all of our students with regards to equity. And then the last thing I would just say on that, as we're learning and listening, we're also bettering ourselves through training. And we had one opportunity this last year before we went into COVID to have a really rich training around this issue. It was a training that was led by, quite frankly, led by the Indiana department. They were the impetus behind getting the training started. And then they collaborated with University of Montana, and there was 90 educators in attendance for this after-school training. And it was really all about examining our own perceptions of equity and what are things that we are doing that are getting in the way of that equity for all students. So it was a great training. My hope would be that we would have those sorts of trainings at some point for all of our staff. I think that's just one thing we can do to really start reaching for this goal. But most importantly, we have to be committed, first of all, to this equity notion, and second of all, to learning and listening and making sure that we're training our staff when appropriate. So I wanted to point that out because I think this is an important time for all of us to take a pause and really focus on this work and ask ourselves, what are we doing to either help or hinder this situation, and who are we listening to, and are we asking the right questions? Are we asking the questions of our students and of the people in our community? Are we asking the right questions? What are we doing to get better in this area? So I just wanted to lead with that because I felt it was a really important piece of the discussion. So I will stop sharing at this point and just have a couple of other things I wanted to say. Oh, and by the way, that equity statement is on the front page of our website. And I just referenced a piece of that policy, but there's much more to that policy. So A couple of other things I just wanted to throw in the room. Big thank you for all those that helped with graduation. Can't thank Hatton enough, and Tracy and Lenora and all the folks that really put the pieces together. It took all of us working together. Dave and Karen and Julie were there on the day helping in the stands. Lenora was helping put the packets together. Tracy and Hatton were there helping to coordinate. So it was really a team effort, and we've gotten a lot of positive responses regarding graduation, but it really couldn't have happened without our team. And to that end, I'd also just like to publicly thank the trustees that were able to attend. I really appreciate your support. I know it was an unusual graduation, that we didn't have a chance to really interact with the students that much, but really appreciate your support. I know the principals appreciated your support in having you at the graduation. So thank you also to the trustees that were there as well. And then the last thing I just want to take a few minutes on, I asked a few extra folks to join our Zoom tonight because this happens to be the last week of work, or the last couple of weeks of work for a couple folks, but I just wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that. So before I get to the retirees, one person that I wanted to just publicly acknowledge, and unfortunately she's not here this evening, but Elise Guest, as you're well aware, Elise is starting her maternity leave tomorrow, and we're really excited for her, and really hoping the very, very best for the next steps as she proceeds through the summer. But what I just wanted to remind folks is that Elise has just done an outstanding job. Elise and her team have done an outstanding job sort of getting us ready for remote learning. I mean, her team was the one that put the remote learning website together over spring break. And by the time the families came back from spring break, we were already rolling with some remote learning activities, which was really great. And Elise and her team have done just a tremendous job supporting this whole remote learning throughout the spring. So appreciate all of her work and her team's work. I just wanted to publicly acknowledge that because I haven't had a chance to say thank you to Elise and her team in a public way. I just wanted to make sure the board was aware of how much she has done in her role in her department. So, but again, we wish the best for Elise, and I'm sure that maybe since the meeting's recorded, she'll have a chance to come back and listen to this, but we wish the best for Elise on her maternity leave. And then the other three people that I'm going to acknowledge this evening are all retiring from the district. They're retiring at different points in the next couple of weeks, but they're definitely on their last few weeks of work, and I wanted to make sure we recognize them. Obviously, we have lots more retirees than this, but these are folks that are in supervisor positions or administrative positions that I just wanted to take a minute to recognize. So first up would be Linda Simon, and I think Linda's on the call. Appreciate her being on the call this evening, but want to just say how much we've really appreciated Linda over the years. So just for the board's benefit, Linda has been a nurse in the district since 1997. She actually moved into the nursing supervisor position in 2007. And as all nurses, I actually know a nurse pretty well. And what I know about nurses is that they're caring and they're really focused on what's important. And with Linda, she's always been really focused on what's important for kids and how to help our staff and our teachers. Linda is really a hero to many people, and I'm just going to explain one of my hero stories about Linda. So when I was working as a principal in the district, I would often have to call Linda. It was usually around lunchtime because kids would get injured or whatever needed to happen at lunchtime. And if you don't know anything about school nurses, the lunchtime is the very busiest time of the day for secretaries and school nurses because they're putting out a lot of fires of things that happen on the playground or kids that need medications or whatever. So that's a really busy time. But Linda was always able to respond very quickly. And an interesting thing about Linda is when I would call her, and this was way back before we really used cell phones that much, but when I would call her, she'd always say, I'm going to pull over because I don't want to drive while I'm talking on the phone. And I always thought to myself, wow, that's commendable. What would Linda do? I always put that in my mind. What would Linda do in this situation? Very safe and commendable. Beyond that, she really knew how to talk to kids. And there were times when A kid just needed to be heard and listened to. And then once she realized that their medical needs were okay, then she would be the one to say, okay, now we can pass off to a counselor or somebody else. But Linda was really great about working with kids. That's just what I recall from her time. So now that we moved into this COVID situation, I can't even describe enough how important Linda has been to our team and our decision-making process. If we ever have to go into a pandemic, we would want Linda on our team. I mean, you just would want somebody like that with all the experts she has in public health and school nursing. It's just been a tremendous benefit. And she's worked 22 and a half years in the district. So in my estimation, she has another half year to give somewhere. And so perhaps someday she'll come back. I just wanted to say thank you to Linda and for all that she's done for our district, and just acknowledge her publicly.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been quite a ride, and it's ending on a definite, I don't know if it's a high point or a low point, but it's been quite the ride. And I think that was a very nice story you told. I wasn't quite sure what you were going to say, so that was good. There were certainly a few other things you could have said, so thank you.
Okay, next up is John Combs, and I think John's on the call. And I understand that I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I think there was perhaps a Missoulian article about John and all of his years of experience. I actually knew John before he was the fine arts supervisor. I knew John in a different role. John has worked for a lot of years in our district. Let me make sure I got the number right. 39 years, but that's not all. He also had some additional years outside of our district. So lots of years as an educator for John. John worked at Hellgate High School for a lot of years. I think I've got this right, from 81 to 2009, maybe. John was at Hellgate High School. What I remember about working with John in my previous role, as I was at Rattlesnake, we had a lot of students that went from Rattlesnake to Hellgate, and we had a great band program at Rattlesnake. And at the end of their 8th grade year, they were just so exhausted with band that I would often hear them saying, "I don't want to ever do band again." But you know what? The next year when they got to Hellgate, I always saw them in band again. John was just had this magic about bringing kids in and keeping them motivated with band. They were so inspired by what he did as a director, and that was very heartwarming for me to see kids not give up on music between that 8th and 9th grade year. So really appreciated all John did there. I also have a story about one of John's kids. I won't tell you which one, but played a little bit of an 8th grade prank on our school the last day of school, and got a late night call from John asking me what I was going to do about it. And so it was a great experience for me to talk with John and work through that issue. But John always cared so much about kids, and that was very clear in his work as a band director and his work as a supervisor. So I just wanted to say a couple of things. John was instrumental in getting our partnership with the Kennedy Center. As you're well aware, we're only one of a handful of districts in the country that have that partnership with the Kennedy Center, and John would not happen without John's help. We continually get named to this list, and I see we've been named again, 2020, named as one of the best communities in the country for music education. That's a testament to John's work. And then if you look back in his history as a teacher, multiple trips to the Tournament of Roses and the Fiesta Bowl and some other things that he did with his band. In 2010, he was named as the outstanding music educator in the Northwest Conference, which is also a tremendous, just a tremendous honor for John. So I will miss John and Linda equally, but I think I'll be able to find John in the fall. If you're looking for John, go to the homecoming parade, the U of M homecoming parade, because all of our retired music folks are all in the parade. So I hope I see John there. They're all together in the U of M band in the fall. So hopefully John will be there too. But thank you, John, for everything you've done for our district.
Well, I just want to thank the Board of Trustees for all your support for the arts in this district. I mean, it really separates Missoula from a lot of communities in a lot of ways. And it's just a great thing for kids. I got to see it time and time again as my students felt that they just had such a rich education throughout the arts, and got to see that as fine arts supervisor. It has been such an honor and a privilege to be a part of the school district. My very first connection with MCPS was with Ida Erickson and the HR department over the phone back in summer of 1981. And she greeted me with friendliness and professionalism and confidence. And I tell you, it's just been a trademark of Missoula County Public Schools for all these years. And it's just been an honor to be able to, as I mentioned in the article, not really have to go to work hardly any days of my career, because it's been such a passion and such a great place to be. So thank you for all you do for kids, and man, it's just been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. All right, last but not least, but maybe the hardest for me, is Lenora. If you didn't know, Lenora will be done this week. So I'm just thankful that she's actually on the call. She could be off doing 100 different other things, and justifiably so. But I really appreciate it. It just speaks to Lenora's dedication, working till the 11th hour, and that really is a hallmark for Lenora. So just a little bit about Lenora, in case you didn't know. She actually started in the personnel department as a secretary, and then as the benefits technician. In 2004, she moved over to the business building as a business specialist, business support specialist. And then in 2017, she moved into the superintendent's office as the executive assistant to the superintendent. What's unique about Lenora is she's worked in both buildings, and there's not very many of us that have done that. And so when I say that Lenora is the glue that holds us all together, you'll understand what I mean. Lenora is our glue. She's the one that keeps us all on track and keeps us going, and makes sure everything we're doing is what needs to be done. But Lenora is also the glue that binds the business building and the administration building, because she's got such wonderful connections to people in both buildings, and has really helped us bridge that gap. I'm looking forward to the time when we're all together, but I know Lenora has helped in that process since we haven't been together as a team. What I would say makes Lenora really, really good at her job is she's calm, cool, and collected. She's got a very stressful job, and she remains calm, and that's really been helpful to me, because obviously when she gets a phone call or gets a visit from somebody that's agitated, it really helps for her to be calm, cool, and collected in that stressful job. And I know that takes a lot of effort, and I really appreciate that. Lenora is the consummate professional. She really takes a lot of pride in her work. She sets high standards, and it's really clear in her work. And I've really appreciated her professionalism. She's just very, very good at what she does. Beyond all that, what's most important is that she's kind, she's warm-hearted, and she often thinks of others. And that has been really appreciated. And I can't thank Lenora enough for all that she's done to help me get acclimated into my new position. And she's just been a really big help to me. I know that now that Lenora has a little more time, she's gonna be spending a lot of time with grandkids. And I think, I might have the team wrong, but I think she's going to be watching a lot of Chicago Bear teams. Is that right?
Oh, no. You do have that wrong. Packers. Right, Tracy?
The Green Bay Packers, which is a huge celebration for her and her husband. So with that, I hope that all three of these folks, Linda, John, and Lenora, take time for themselves. They really have done an outstanding job. But thank you, Lenora, for everything you've done.
Thank you for your kind words, Rob, and want to say thank you to all the trustees too for. I wasn't going to do that. Just for your support. It's been a great experience working for the district. I can't believe 21 years has flown by so fast. I appreciate all your support, and Tracy, I know you'll do a great job replacing me. And Marcia, thank you for all your kind words and everything you've done. You guys are great. Working for Pat for 13 years was a good experience. I learned a lot. We had a lot of stories to tell, shared a lot of our personal lives together, and it's been great. Thank you.
Thanks, Lenora. I appreciate that. So see, even in a virtual setting, we can still we can still thank each other and be positive about this. So I really appreciate all the work that those three folks have done. We have lots of other retirees to celebrate, which we did in the retirement video, but I just wanted to acknowledge these three. And we'll have another chance later this month for a few others. So thank you. Sorry for the length of the superintendent report. Appreciate you letting me take just a few extra minutes this evening.
Thank you, Rob. And since you did mention the retiree video, I would encourage everyone who's listening to or here at this meeting to go to the MCPS website and look at all the retirees, because Tracy, and I believe her daughter in Hatton, did a great job of and Dave did a great job of recognizing each one of our retirees this year. So it's a really nice video. So thank you so much. And so moving on from kind of an emotional moment, we'll move on to new business, which is 7A1, which is to approve a grant application summary. And I believe Karen's going to explain the summary. It's found on page 24, and it's for the Egg Center.
Yes, thank you. And I want to give a shout out. I know we all want to give a shout out to the Ag group. They have done some amazing work lately. And this is especially Christy Rothy, who is their grant writer in residence. So the first, there are two grants here. The first one is to the DNRC, and it's for irrigation. It's to help with the irrigation of the Ag Center. And this is a grant that Christy won last year, and she's applying again.
Does anyone have any questions for Karen about the grant? Either raise your hand virtually or on your screen, or unmute yourself. Just going to go down the list, make sure I'm not missing anyone. So I don't see anyone with questions. So the recommendation is that the trustees approve the grant application summary that's been submitted by Christy Rothy. Is there a motion to do so? It was moved by trustee Decker. Is there a second? Seconded by trustee Oldperson. Is there any board discussion? We have 3 seconds, it looks like. I'm not seeing any other board discussion. I do want to commend the Egg Center. They have really stepped it up during this time and donated a whole lot of pork to the Missoula Food Bank, which was greatly appreciated. Adam Brock spoke to my Kiwanis Club today, and he was singing the Egg Center's praises. And I know Christy, along with Tom, are just the backbone of that program. So kudos to Christy for reapplying for this grant. So if you can pass that along to Christy, that would be great. Anyone else have any board discussion? Not seeing any hands go up. Is there any public comment? I'm just going to go down just to see if there's any hands raised. Not seeing any. Then all trustees in favor of the motion to approve the grant application summary found beginning on page 24, please type into chat yes, as I don't think we have anyone on the phone. And I'm just scrolling down. It appears, let me double check. I was just looking for trustee McDonald. Okay, yes, it is unanimous as to all trustees present. So thank you. And now we move on to 7A2, which is to approve the second grant application summary submitted by Christy Rothy. And again, Karen, is there something that you want to point out about this grant application that's different than the other one?
Yeah, I was just excited to see they were Johnny on the spot to apply for some CARES money, which must have had a component about food. So they have applied for a weigh station so they can weigh their animals appropriately. And there are a few more things like a splitting saw, and other things that I would suggest farmers know more about than I do. But I think it's great that they were right there to apply.
Thanks. Anyone have any questions for Karen? Trustee Decker?
Hi. Maybe I'm just confused, but I think there are a couple of different kinds of grants that are being made available right now. And one of them is called an innovation grant, but there's also like an agriculture and food security grant that was more recently released. And I'm curious about which one, if possible, that this is related to, because this seems like something we would have wanted maybe already anyway. I'm not 100% sure how it's COVID related, but I mean, clearly there's probably a wide net that's going to be cast over grants like this, but I'm just curious, knowing other folks in the community who are applying for innovation grants for other purposes. It's just interesting to understand what grant is being applied for what.
So
and I would not have an answer to the question, but I can find out.
Okay, thanks. Any other trustees have any questions? Not seeing any indication of that. Then the recommendation is that there is a motion to approve the grant application summary found beginning on page 26. And let me see. Is there such a motion? Trustee Oldperson has made the motion to approve the grant application summary, and Trustee Smith has seconded it. Is there any board discussion? I would echo what Karen has indicated about being really on top of possible grant opportunities. That's very impressive. So if you can pass that along to Christy and her team.
Yes.
Thanks. And so any other trustee board comments or discussion? Any public comment? Not, let me double check. Not seeing any hands being raised. Then all trustees in favor of the motion to approve the grant application summary, please type in yes into the chat box. So that allows me to count the trustees. And it looks as if that's unanimous as to all trustees present. So thank you. Turning my page. We move on to 2, which is an information item. It's return to school fall 2020. And so I'll let Dr. Watson take the lead. It looks like there are several people that might be presenting some information. At this point, it's information only, and I'm sure we'll be continuing to have updates on the plan for school in the fall of 2020. So Dr. Watson, I'll turn it over to you and I'll go on mute. Thanks.
All right, thanks. So yes, I will turn this over to the leaders of our team. So what we've done is we created a restart committee, and this was done a few weeks ago, and the committee is well represented from folks across the district. but it's being led, the work is being led by Hatton and Dave and Karen Allen. And I think what they're going to do is kind of describe in brief what the committee has been working on. We have the goal to release some information to our parents on Thursday, and so we wanted the board to get a little bit of a preview as to what we're thinking about restart, but also wanted the board to have a time just to give us some feedback on things that they're thinking about. So I believe Hatton is first.
Thanks so much, Superintendent Watson. So the first thing I want to say is thank you to Dave and Karen. We have been in the trenches with this work, and I want to thank them for the teamwork and just the collegial sharing of this leadership. We've all been there for each other when one or the other of us was overwhelmed with some other element of our job or of COVID planning, and I just really appreciate having high quality colleagues to work with on this. So I'll start by saying, in addition to the fact that Dave and Karen and I have organized this effort, we have 75 people from across the district who have participated and continue to participate, and they represent a wide variety of roles, from custodians to food service to paraeducators to nurses to counselors to classroom teachers, principals, all kinds of folks. So I think we are trying to make sure we get the perspectives of a lot of different brilliant people across our district to inform this plan. So I'll start with just some guiding principles that we have used to drive our work. We certainly want our plan to be responsive to the physical and mental health needs of our students and our staff, first and foremost. We also want this plan to be based on the COVID-19 outbreak conditions here in Missoula and in our surrounding counties in our valley. We recognize that we are different than some of the large cities on the coasts, and we've had educators and others really want to highlight that we very much create a locally refined solution. We want our plan, it must adhere to the guidelines of our governor, our public health department, and the CDC, as well as any guidelines that may come out from the Office of Public Instruction. We know that they have a state level task force that hopefully is releasing some updated guidance in another week or two. We also want to stress that this plan relies on flexibility, adaptation, and collaboration. And that is really from everyone. That is not just those that are employees of our school district, that's the families, that's the businesses in our community, that's our partners in after school and childcare. We're all in it together. And that we recognize that everything will have to adapt based on the changing conditions of the outbreak at any given time. So with that, I'll pass it on to Dave to talk about some of our health standards that we're considering.
Yeah, so one of the things the committee have been looking at, we did break it down to 4 areas, was the health, safety, academic, business, and the social emotional issues. What I want to just touch base on is about some of the health and safety standards that are presently in place and things that we're considering for next year as we look at the reopen. Regarding health precautions, we're expecting that we're going to be doing some wellness procedures for adults and students that may include temperature and symptom checks, wearing of masks, frequent hand washing, hand sanitizer, and continual disinfection of our buildings and buses. We're looking at all the issues surrounding the classroom workspace and bus capacities. Right now, we're still trying to maintain that 6-foot distance from each other. When you're looking at buildings and in buses and schools, that limits the number of people that you could have, say on a bus. At a classroom, you could have anywhere potentially from 10 to 16 students. So that makes us need to evaluate our furniture and our schedule with kids when they come in. One of the other things we're evaluating is even student movement within buildings. So the things that we can do to try to minimize kids coming into contact with a bunch of other kids. So for example, we might have lunches served in classrooms, as an example, something we might do. We're evaluating the continuation of the sports and clubs that use our facilities and making sure that they will use the same health precautions that are under the health and county guidelines and our own guidelines. We're evaluating the use of large groups activities in our schools. talking about the social distancing, what we're going to be able to do for assemblies and dances, fun runs, etc. We'd like to maintain as much as we can, but of course that'll be dictated by the circumstances when we get school open. Looking at student supplies and materials, one of the things we're going to try to emphasize is making sure that all students have their own materials and supplies, so there's a limitation of sharing. We are going to work with the county and our nursing supervisor if we have cases of positive COVID this fall, and we'll follow the guidelines that are set out by the county. And we're going to make sure that we're trying to prioritize and identify those students who, because of online or non-face-to-face, may need some additional academic supports, food supports, or even mental health supports for those students. Lastly, one of the other things that we're evaluating is remote and online options for both students and staff that are in high-risk groups that they might be at risk coming into our building. So we're going through processes and procedures to try to identify those staff and students and then determine how we can set up remote options to keep them safe. With that, I'll turn it over to Karen.
Thanks, Dave and Hatton. As you can imagine, there are many factors that influence our scheduling options. But as we look ahead to the start of the next school year, we are absolutely committed to making sure that it can be done, that learning can happen safely with the health and the well-being of our community as our highest priority. First, and Dave told you this a moment ago, we're working on an all online learning model for students and staff who can't come back, at least not now, at least not in the fall, can't come back to school. Second, we believe that in all of our schools, we will be able to offer a face-to-face instructional model and a remote online instructional model for the 2020-21 school year for most kids. You may be aware that the University of Montana has modified its calendar for the fall, but we have decided, at least at this point, that we plan to stick to our current calendar for the 2021 school year. Due to guidance for physical distancing on buses, as Dave mentioned, and in school spaces, students will not attend school in the face-to-face instructional model every day. We just don't have enough room for all kids to come to school at the same time. Our Return to School Plan Committee is considering face-to-face scheduling options that will prioritize siblings attending school on the same days and will also prioritize extra face-to-face instructional time for certain high need or high risk populations of students. We also realize that we will need support from our community child care partners to provide options for students when they are not in school. This will be necessary for all of our working parents, including our own staff. We know that the ideal scenario is that health conditions improve to the point that we can be back in our school buildings every day with all of our students. We probably will not be able to have that in the fall, but we are obviously moving toward it. And Hatton, I'm passing back to you.
Thanks, Karen and Dave. So just a little bit on timeline. As Rob indicated in his opening remarks, we will share some of what we just verbalized for you in writing with parents and on our website. And we hope to do that Wednesday or Thursday of this week. And we know that there are so many elements that still need to be designed down in the weeds and the details, and we have so much input from those 75 staff and also from the staff that they are liaising with and getting input from. And as I mentioned, there's still guidance to come from the Office of Public Instruction. And we'll have to adjust and refine our plans based on that guidance, based on the data that we get from our staff and our students on the surveys that we currently have open. So in order to allow time for that, I would expect that it would be late July when we can really say more in detail. And we think that would be a reasonable time to know a little bit more about the health conditions at that time, right before we'd have students coming back into buildings. So that's what we're thinking in terms of timeline for more detailed reports, but I will leave it to Chair Holland and the superintendent to schedule more of these discussions for future board meetings in between now and that time. So that's everything we prepared for you, and I think this is now an opportunity for questions and dialogue.
So does anyone have any questions? I guess we'll direct them to Rob, and he can invite, or Dr. Watson, and he can invite others to also provide information. So if you have a question, just either physically or virtually raise your hand. So Trustee Decker has a question. Go ahead, Trustee Decker.
Thanks. A comment and a question, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. My comment is that, of course, I'm very eager to support and help and participate in my with conversations about partnering with our childcare community. That's something that our childcare community is actively engaged in at the state and local level, is trying to think about what resources exist and what resources can be called into place at the state level, because of course it's not unique to Missoula that we're facing a situation where kids need somewhere to be that doesn't currently exist. And so that's going to take a lot of creative problem solving. That's the comment. The question is that I was excited to hear you allude, Karen, to the idea that what children's schedules might look like might not look exactly the same for everyone, that it's not necessarily going to be a cookie cutter schedule that every child will be in, and which is great for just a variety of reasons, both because children have lots of different health needs, but also because their learning and their social emotional needs are very different. And some children have had, really positive experiences with remote learning, and some children have struggled for a variety of reasons. I was hoping that even though we don't know the answers yet, you might say a little more about what kinds of considerations and what sort of family input might be involved with determining those types of varied individual schedules, what kinds of questions parents should be thinking about.
Rob, you want to take that?
Yeah, I can give it a shot. I don't know if this addresses your question, Trustee Decker, but I think we will have some options in the fall. I think obviously we'll have an in-person option that's going to look a lot different. And I think what we're going to have to do is be really clear with parents, like, this is what the in-person option will look like. It could be that we've only got half the kids in school on any given day, and we will obviously have work for the other kids, but they may not be in school. And so I think we have to be really clear with parents. This is what we expect the in-person version to look like. I don't know how long we're going to have to do that. Right now, the guidance from the CDC is to lessen the number of kids in the building, and that's the only way to do it, is to have only half the kids there. What I worry about is what's on the other side of that, because families will need to have something on the other side of that in order to, continue their schedules. And so, like, if a kid's not in school, what does that mean? What are they doing? I also worry about making sure we've got families in school on the same day so that they don't have some kids in and some kids out. But I think we need to be real transparent on what we think it's going to look like. And then we also need to tell them, if that's not going to work for your situation, we also have a remote learning plan that will continue. And that remote learning plan would be another option for families if they don't believe the in-person option is going to work for whatever reason. What I do know is we can't have one teacher doing both. So it will be enough for a teacher to manage that every other day environment. We're going to have a separate set of teachers that are managing that, that full-time remote learning option. So lots of logistics and coordination, but I think to answer your question, Trustee Decker, we would present these options for parents likely sometime in the middle of the summer, so we can get a sense of how many kids are going to take up that remote learning versus how many kids are going to want the in-person.
Rob, would you be okay if I add the example of our summer ramp-up program, or do you not want to get into that now?
Yeah, I think that's appropriate because it does kind of speak to the calendar issue too.
So one way that we're making sure we're providing those extra supports for students who need them is our elementary and our middle school teachers and principals worked to identify students who achieved a certain score, and that score could be based on their level of online engagement, their current scores in terms of STAR, math and reading assessments, things like that. And students who were identified to be in that group were invited and are being invited this week and next week by their principals to participate in 2 weeks worth of instruction in August, which we're calling our summer ramp up program. And Julie can speak to that more because she's really done heroes work in getting that going. So that is an example of how those extra supports might be made possible in terms of interventions for smaller groups that are identified who need them. And I think the nuts and bolts of how we do that and what time we do it and how many minutes kids get it is stuff that we still have to work out.
And so did you want to add anything, Julie?
I'm available if there's any questions, but I think Hatton did a nice job giving an overview. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions? I'm looking for hands being raised.
And Trustee Oldperson.
Service? And then did you see one, Dr. Watson?
Yep, Trustee Oldperson has.
Okay, so we'll do Trustee Service's question first, then Trustee Oldperson. So go ahead, Trustee Service.
So I was curious, with high school, I would assume that schedules are going to be affected because you're going to have different, enrollment makeups for the different types of classes. How do you see that working out?
Well, one of the things that if we had to do an every other day model, one of the things that might work really well is the block schedule that they have at Big Sky, because it lessens the number of kids that they might be interacting with in a given day. So I know that'll be a consideration for our high school principals. We will have some students that can't come back, and we've explored a couple of options that are a little bit different for high school. So one of the things that we did is we had some conversations with the Montana Digital Academy, and we might be able to use their resources to sort of provide that remote learning option. We'll still have some teachers that are attached to it, but we may have some different options for high school that we don't have at middle school or elementary because of the nature of how the Digital Academy works. I guess what I would say is that we're hoping that we can provide a rich program in the core areas so that kids don't lose any credit that first semester, that they're actually proceeding in a course and actually gaining credit over that first semester, so that maybe as conditions change by second semester, they could be right back in school on a typical path of a high school student. So those are some of the things we've chatted about with high schools. I think the one thing I'm struggling to get my brain around is what we've been encouraged to do is lessen the number of interactions kids have during the day. So in an elementary school, that's easy because you've got one class, 25 kids, they can pretty much stay with each other all day. When you get to high school, there is more mixing of kids. And so whatever we can do to lessen that with the high school schedule, I think will probably be key.
And Rob, I've been very excited in dealing with the high school principals. Ryan Rettig is on the committee, and he's working closely with the other high school principals, and they're really thinking in different ways. And they learned quite a bit from our previous online experience about how to bring teachers together and get the curriculum organized. So there's more collaboration and more interface of the people teaching the same courses. So I've been pleasantly pleased with their excitement about solving these problems that we're talking about.
And Trustee Oldperson, you had a question?
Thank you, Chair Holland. I have a couple. First one is, Dr. Watson, in the papers, I don't see anything where it talks about the budget and how that will impact, especially for the teachers, if we're going to have to add to where they don't teach to online and in person. And I just wanted to know if there was, I know you sent out the link to the little page, and I was going through that, and I don't see anything in this. And I was wondering if we'd be able to view that sometime soon to see what the budget impact will be for the remote learning. And then the second one is, how is this reopening plan impact students with IEPs and stuff like that?
Yes, those are great questions. So one of the things that we've been looking at is that overall budget, and there is an estimate out there from the National Superintendents Organization. They estimate that if you were to complete all of the requirements by the CDC, it could be as much as $490 of additional budget per student. So for our district, that's about $4.4 million. And obviously we don't have that in our budget. We don't have that flexibility in our budget. We are receiving some CARES Act funding, but the CARES Act funding is about half of that. It's about $2 million. And so what we're starting to do now is build our budget around that CARES Act money. And Julie and Hatton just talked about the ramp up program. That's a great example. We know that we'll have to, in order to complete that program, we're going to have teachers willing to work, those 2 weeks before school starts. And that means they're going to be needed to be compensated for their time, obviously. On the transportation end, we may have increases in busing costs because in order to complete the requirements under the CDC, you have to have fewer kids on the bus, and which means you may have to stagger the buses and have more routes or more runs in order to get all the kids to school. So we know there's an increased cost potentially in transportation. Once the kids get to school, we're going to have a health assistant or a school nurse or a health assistant to sort of run the screening process once they get to school. And so that there's an increased cost there because we don't have enough nurses for every school building. So we're going to have to hire additional health aides. But what we're trying to do, Trustee Oldperson, is sort of live within that budget that we received from the CARES Act, which is around $2 million, realizing that it's probably going to cost much more than that if you go off of some of the early estimates from the National Superintendents Organization. We also have preserved some budget from this spring, with the board's permission, created a interlocal agreement that allows us to preserve some leftover budget from this spring that we could use next fall. And Pat can explain that if you have questions. So we don't have a final budget yet, but I will be bringing that back to you with regards to those needs and how it fits within the CARES Act money. The second question was also an excellent question about the impacts on IEP students. And I know that our new special ed director, Jenny Haynes, has been part of these meetings and been thinking with that lens, like how this will impact special education students. So I guess I would ask either Karen or Dave if they want to comment on that. I know both have been on calls with Jenny Haynes.
It looks like Julie wants to comment on it.
Excuse me, Trustee Oldperson, are you asking about the summer ramp-up program specifically and students with IEPs or just the whole going back to school year with IEPs?
Return back to school.
Then that's more Karen and Dave.
Yeah, one of the things we're really looking at is options for some kids to be in school more days. So that's the one we're really talking about most for kids with IEPs. So instead of being 2 days in school and 2 days on remote, some of them, probably not all of them, because they wouldn't all need that, but we're looking at the possibility of having more in-school time, and also that providing more time, at least for students for whom this is appropriate, to be running alongside the kids in general education with the support of special educators, rather than some of the separate programs that we're running at this point.
The only thing I would also add, it was mentioned, Superintendent Watson mentioned Ginny Haynes, the Director of Special Education, participating. But on our committees, we also have special education teachers participating and paraeducators participating in the process to help us come up with what might be the best way to address and meet those students' needs.
And it looks like Trustee McDonald has a question and Trustee Mercer has a question. So Trustee McDonald first.
Trustee McDonald may be having trouble with her mic. If that's the case, maybe we just read her question.
Oh, okay. Let me get back to it. Trustee McDonald's question is about the class that just graduated. What did their grades look like, or what was considered for graduation? Do we feel that they lost out on pertinent education versus normal education? I'm not sure how to better clarify that, but that's what she has written.
Yeah, so I think I can answer that. You probably will recall in some of the trustee discussions, one of the things that I asked for flexibility around was the graduation requirements, because we knew that in this world of remote learning that we would have some students that were not able to access the education. And so we did use that flexibility with some of our graduates, which just means, if you recall, what that meant is that, you know, they had to meet the minimum state requirements, but sometimes in an elective area where that wasn't necessarily required by the state, then we gave them some exception on that so they could still graduate. So we did ask for that exception in the graduation requirements, and that was used. I'm sorry, I don't know how many students used that, but I can get that for the board. But that was one thing. I would say, you know, definitely not a normal education for the last few months of school for our seniors. I think they did the best they could. I think the last few months of a senior year we're already kind of sort of combating that senioritis, and so this was probably even harder for some of our seniors. But I felt pretty confident that our principals worked through all the logistics around any exceptions that we had to make for graduation. And then the other question that we're getting quite frequently now is about the grading and what it looks like on a transcript. We gave our students the options to take the grade that they received and post that on their transcript, or if they would rather, they can take a pass instead of the grade. And the reason that they might take a pass is because it's not calculated into the GPA. Lots of other districts have gone straight pass-fail, and so there'll be a lot of seniors graduating this year from school districts across the country that simply have a pass-fail on their transcript. So all of the colleges will have to consider that in admission policy. The Montana University system has already stated that they're going to be flexible around that pass-fail on the transcript. But we wanted to give our students the option to take the grade if they wanted to. And so that's why we provided that option. So most kids are receiving their grade, and then if they prefer to take a pass-fail, that's an option. I don't know if that addresses all of Trustee McDonald's questions, but that's a little bit about our graduates.
And so it looks like Trustee Mercer has a question, Trustee Decker has another question, and Trustee McDonald has another question. So Trustee Mercer, your question first.
I might try to slip in a couple. So first, and I want to preface by saying I think everyone did heroic work. My own anecdotal experience was that online learning was an inadequate substitute for face-to-face learning. I appreciate that survey that's out there. I look forward to seeing what it says. Are we going to see, though, or what's your schedule for getting actual, testing data, like accidental, on what it's costing not to have kids in school in terms of objective learning, I guess. So that's one question. A really more fundamental, basic question about all of this is, as a new board member, I don't think I quite understand what the role of the board, what are we going to be asked to say yay or nay to, or is this all just sort of the public transparency role? What are you going to come to us and ask to say yay or nay to? Big picture, not specifics, but just like, what's the ballpark? And sort of along to that, I guess, on who's making decisions, what is even the district's flexibility? At some point, Missoula Public or County Health just says you can't have more than 10 people, and that's just that, right? I mean, there's a lot of other decision makers out there. It seems like our room to maneuver is actually fairly narrow, and if we spike, then that's just that, and we're closed, right? I mean, so those are my three sort of questions.
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember what the first one was. So what I would tell you is that with regards to assessment, like how do we know what the kids actually learned or didn't learn during remote learning? That is a tougher question to answer. One thing that Trustee Mercer, just so you're aware of, we do have a district assessment that we give. It's a reading and math assessment. We give it 3 times a year. And what's great about this assessment is it's given across the country, so we can kind of compare growth of our students. So there's always some growth from fall to spring, and we can actually see did our kids grow more or less than the average kid across the country that took the same assessment. Unfortunately, we were unable to give that spring assessment in the remote learning environment, so that we don't have that spring data. But what's also interesting about this assessment is in the fall, when we give it again, we can actually measure this, what we call the summer regression, or the amount that kids lost during the summertime. They always lose a little bit, but we can compare, how much they lost during the summer and assume that they probably lost some during remote learning as well. So what'll really be critical, and I don't know if this answers your question, but what will really be critical is to look at that fall assessment and see, is it in line with what we've had in previous years in the fall, or is it significantly lower? And can some of that be contributed to what happened in remote learning? So that's the assessment piece, and we will give that assessment in the fall when the kids return. Regarding your question about whose decisions these are, I think that's an excellent question, and I guess I would just go back to where we were over spring break. The governor was the one that made the decision to close schools. Then eventually he lifted that decision and left it up to the local board of trustees. What I would tell you about our health department, our local health department, they have been fairly consistent in telling us that they will provide advice, but they're not going to make a recommendation for us to close, but they will always provide advice on what we should do. And so any of these plans that we develop, we obviously are going to get advice from the local health department, but the decision to reopen ultimately is our decision. Whether or not that's a board decision or an administrative decision, I think would probably be up for debate, and it's something we can discuss with our district attorney. Our attorney will be coming probably to the next board meeting to give the board the annual trustee orientation, but that would be an excellent question for legal, either from our district attorney or from the Montana School Boards Association. Is it an administrative decision to reopen, or is it a board decision? What I will commit to you is that we'll continue to flesh out these plans and eventually bring to the board a plan for reopening, and we will ask for your approval on that plan at some level.
Did that answer your questions, Trustee Mercer?
Yes, thanks. So fall is when we'll get the data. Yeah, it's sort of operating a little bit in the dark about how detrimental it was, and that's unfortunate. And I don't know if there'd be any way to do some sampling that'd be statistical, that'd be meaningful, but maybe it wouldn't be worth it. So that was, yes, they answered my questions. Thank you.
Thanks. And so Trustee Decker had another question, and Trustee McDonald had another question. So Trustee Decker first, then Trustee McDonald, and I'll read Trustee McDonald's question.
Thanks. I guess I'm still sort of trying to get a sense of what options are at this point being considered or being weighed. And after hearing some more description in your answers, what I'm hearing, and I just want to make sure that I'm getting this right, is that some students may continue with remote learning and some students will be in buildings, probably not every day, and how that's scheduled out. And I'm curious about whether it's being considered, especially for students who are like middle school and older, that there might actually be some kind of blending that could also make good use of our resources, so that certain subject areas or certain content areas or certain teachers who really took to online learning and students who, so that there might be students who would do a whole lot of remote learning, but would have the opportunity to be face-to-face for something, sometime, in some way, or vice versa, students who are mostly in buildings and would do some things remotely. And I absolutely hear that we would need to make sure that teachers weren't responsible for doing the same job twice. So it's a question of like how we deploy people into one or the other modality. But I'm curious about whether there's any, if that's still on the table, or if we're sort of focused into the idea of it's kind of either or.
Well, I think I would answer it this way, Trustee Decker. Even for those kids that are back in person, they will still have some remote learning, because on the off days when they're not in school, they'll have to continue with some sort of remote learning. So what I envision is, as a teacher, I'm putting my curriculum up, and when I have the kids in class, we're working on that curriculum. But on the days that they're not in class, they're still working on that curriculum in a remote way. What you've described, we haven't considered, to my knowledge. We can ask Dave, Karen, or Hatton, but I think what you've described is a student that might be on remote learning, but also in school for part of it. That would be difficult to manage. I'll just be honest with you, based on the personnel that we have, because what I'd like to do is have teachers focused on that in person, and other teachers focused on the remote. So it would be difficult to manage, but it's something that we haven't considered.
And then Trustee McDonald's question is, did the district show any decrease in graduates?
And to my knowledge, Trustee McDonald, we did not. I think it was I think because of the flexibility that we had around graduation requirements, I don't think we saw a decrease, but I haven't had a chance yet to ask the high school principal, so I will do that and get back to the trustees.
Okay. Any other questions? Just scrolling down to see. Any hands being raised? Seeing none, I do have a question which is somewhat related to Trustee Mercer's question. It appears that there are national guidelines from the CDC. There probably are state guidelines, since we know we're in phase 2 under the governor's directives. And then the city county health department has its own set of directives. And so I guess my question is there a coordination among those groups at all? And also the Office of Public Instruction, to add a fourth one in. So is the task force or the committee, is there someone tasked with trying to make sure everything lines up? Because basically, if the government says one thing, we've got to comply. I mean, federal government, if the governor says something, we've got to comply. And right now, the current funding model is on A and B, or students in seats in buildings. So would that take a directive from OPI or the governor so that we can adopt this more flexible model? So that's my question.
Yeah, that is a great question. What I have learned through this process is the governor's order carries the weight, but anything more restrictive than the governor's order can be made by the local health officer. So if the governor, I'll just give you a quick example. If the governor says no groups larger than 50, the local health officer could come in and say no groups larger than 10. So the local health officer can always be more restrictive than the governor, but she can't be less restrictive than the governor. So it's really the governor's kind of sets the upper limit. At this point in time, the governor has lifted his rules around school closure, and he's left that to the local trustees with the guidance from the health officer. So I think at this point in time, it is a local decision. What the guidance we're referring to is strictly guidance. CDC has said this is the guidance you should consider, and the OPI is developing guidance based on the CDC guidance for districts to consider. But again, that's guidance that has been sort of baked into our plan. But I don't believe the CDC has the authority to close a school. I think that lies with the governor or the board of trustees. And with regards, Marcia, to your question about funding, that is an interesting question. We haven't received an answer about that yet, but if you also recall, during the time of closure, we adopted the proficiency policy, which allows us to consider proficiency rather than seat time. And so my hope is that OPI will recognize that policy and allow us to have some different models and still receive funding at the full level. But that's a question that's yet to be answered.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's a complicated funding model that we have in Montana anyway, and it's certainly been impacted now.
And
anyone
Patton had something to add to my comments.
Here, Helen, I was just going to add that when I spoke about the OPI task force, if you are interested and you Google OPI MT Learn task force, what we can see is that there are two separate groups. One is the educators group that we expect will be giving guidance with regard to how to do online and small group learning. The other is more of a legislative group. And I think that group will be wrestling with questions such as the one you've just asked and Superintendent Watson spoke about. And you can see a little bit about their meeting schedule and the types of topics that they are addressing. So hopefully that legislative group is giving some updated guidance. We hope sometime in June, but we're not totally sure.
Thank you for that. I will go take a look at their website. Thanks. Any other trustee questions or comments? This is information only, so either comments or questions are appropriate. Looking for hands up or anything in the chat box. So seeing none, even though this is information only, is there any public comment on this topic? And Hatton, if you can help me look to see if anyone has unmuted themselves or if they want to raise a hand virtually or on their screen. I don't see anything being indicated either on the mics unmuting or a hand going up.
I don't see anything either.
Okay, so thank you for that information. I'm sure this conversation will be ongoing, and at some point it will be interesting to see what life looks like perhaps in August, because things have changed so quickly over the course of this pandemic. So thank you to the committee for all the hard work you're doing, since you're wearing so many hats at this time anyway. So really appreciate the work on this committee, as well as others that you, or other obligations and duties that you have. And so we move on to 4, which is the high school transfer process. Again, this is information only. The plan is for Dr. Watson to begin the conversation tonight on the high school transfer process, and at a point later in our meetings, we will be asked to either approve a process, a policy, or else be informed about procedures that will be in place. So I'll leave it to Dr. Watson. It looks like he's sharing his screen.
Yes, thank you, Chair Holland. I know it seems a little out of place when we were talking about such important items before with return to school, but there are other things that we need to move forward in our district, and this is an example of a thing that needs to move forward before next school year. So when I arrived in Missoula, as you will recall, I had a number of meetings with various stakeholders in my 100-day plan, and I identified several what I considered imperatives that we needed to address. This was one of the issues that came up from a variety of different stakeholders for a variety of different reasons. And I think, quite honestly, it really does tie back to what I started the meeting with, which was that equity policy, making sure that our students had equal access to educational opportunities. And so I just want to spend a few minutes kind of laying the background for this, and then getting board comment, because we have not had a chance to talk as a board about this area. So really briefly, this is, I already mentioned, this is why we're discussing this. It was identified by the stakeholders in my entry plan. Our enrollment at grades 6 through 8 continues to increase. And as those enrollments start to reach high school, what that means is we have, less and less room in our high schools. And so we have to be really clear about this transfer process. And then there is a need for clarification because of the fact we don't have any specific policy in place. It causes a lot of frustration, not only among staff, but also parents and administrators as we try to tackle some of these requests. So I want to give you just a brief picture of what it looked like this last year. As you're aware, when students enter 9th grade, we allow them to make a request to go to a school outside their attendance area, go to a high school outside their attendance area, and it's allowed as long as they can provide their own transportation. They have to fill out a form. They have to list a reason on the form. And so this year, what I noted is about 14%, which equates to, over 140 or about 130, 140 students that were entering 9th grade requested a school outside their attendance area. And at the end of the day, the numbers were pretty equal in terms of in and out. So we required them to list a reason on the form, but we really didn't deny any requests. We granted all the requests, primarily because there is no policy or procedure that would say this is, these students should be accepted, these students should not be accepted. There's really no policy that states that. So we really just accepted all of the requests. And my understanding is that's happened for a few years now in terms of just granting all the requests for those incoming 9th graders. Once kids get into high school and then they request once they're in high school for a transfer, then we can look on a space available basis to see if we can grant the request. But really that doesn't happen until they get into high school. I would just want to remind the trustees that all of the high schools provide a comprehensive program that allows kids to achieve the graduation requirements, but there are some differences in elective and academic options. For example, the Health Science Academy that exists at Big Sky is an academic option. And so because we have a few of those academic options among all 3 schools, it is my belief that we will always need a transfer option because we have those differences in our programs. And quite honestly, I think that's what makes our high schools so rich in terms of culture, is that they have some differences in programs. So it would be great to say that we wouldn't let any kids transfer, but I think that's unrealistic for a number of reasons. And there really isn't any school district in the state that has no transfer options. All districts have a transfer option. It just depends on how strict they are in that option, but all districts have an option for transfer. And then at this point in time, what makes this whole process a little frustrating is that students can really request a transfer at any time during the school year, which makes it very difficult for our administrative staff to sort of balance that, because a kid could request a transfer during first semester to one school, and then second semester they could request a different transfer, and there's no guidelines on that would stop that. So what I would like to see, and the reason I'm bringing this forward, is we need to have a clear process. The process should be consistently applied to all students in all schools. The process would be very transparent so that we don't have stakeholders wondering, like, well, is this going to be allowed or not allowed? And then we would obviously develop a communication plan to clarify the process. So in summary, we're always going to have requests for transfers, and we will continue to allow transfers for a variety of really good reasons to do so. But what's frustrating right now is there's unclear guidance and a lack of a defined process. And I believe that we need to address this issue through adoption of policy and procedure. So I'll stop there and just see if folks have questions or comments or things you would like me to consider as we tackle this issue.
So, sorry, I'm just scrolling down. Trustee Mercer has a question and Trustee Decker has a question. So Trustee Mercer first, and then Trustee Decker.
So two questions. Why isn't space available? Just cover it in general. As long as there's space, anybody can go wherever they want. Yeah, you can only move at the beginning of the year, but otherwise space available. And then second question, thoughts on, does this need to be consistent with how moves are allowed at the middle school and elementary school level, which to me also has some equity stuff and should be maybe more transparent and coherent, but.
Yeah, those are great questions. I'll address the second question first. We do have a process at middle school and elementary, and it is much more about space available because there's just so much more limits in those environments. We just don't have the space to move kids around a lot, but it does happen. Occasionally kids do transfer, but generally we've kind of held the line on those ones because we just don't have the space. What's unique about high school is high school space is dictated by the number of kids in the building. So all of our high schools have plenty of space. Space is not the issue at high school. The issue at high school is the number of teachers assigned to the various curricular areas. And the way that we determine the number of teachers is based on the number of students that are in the building. So as long as we know far enough in advance that we've got, X number of students requesting a transfer to this school, then we can adjust staffing. What's very difficult for us right now at the high school level is to be able to adjust staffing the way that transfers are handled now, because really a student can transfer at any time of the year for any reason, and it's very difficult for us to adjust staffing that quickly. So, but what we'd also like to do is try to balance the numbers. And what I mean by that is we know right now there are more students that actually physically live in the Sentinel boundary. So we know Sentinel will be larger than the other two schools because we haven't adjusted that boundary. So, but it shouldn't be extraordinarily larger than the other two schools. We shouldn't have more kids at Sentinel that beyond what live in the boundary. So that's what I meant by the ins and outs. So if we had some kids that left Sentinel and we had some kids that transferred in, then it seemed to balance out in terms of the number of kids in the boundary. But if we get to a point where there's, a lot more kids at either Sentinel, Hellgate, or Big Sky that are requesting in than are requesting out, then it could create problems for us as well. So our hope is to try to balance that. And the reason is because so many of the programs within any particular school at the high school level are based on the number of kiddos. So if you get too low in certain schools, then it can really impact your programming for all the other students. So we try to balance as best as we can and keep the number of kids based on how many kids actually live in the area. But again, what I said is it's been harder at high school because there is more space available. It's been harder for us to really manage this transfer issue.
And Trustee Decker had a question.
Thanks. Yeah, I think on a kind of instinctive level, I have a sense that switching between schools in our district at the high school level has to do with equity. And I also have a feel for how that played out in, for example, the way the middle schools were set up district-wise in years past, that sort of the title programs were stacked a little more so into Porter. That's part of its history. And but I'm curious about what you see as the equity impacts of transferring between high schools. If you could just say maybe a little more about that, because it'll help me understand what we're solving for.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think, as I said before, I think all three of our high schools offer a comprehensive program that allows kids to progress towards graduation. I don't think that's a concern. If I felt like one school had, was missing a piece of that comprehensive program, then I do believe that we would have a significant equity issue. But what I want to guarantee is no matter where you live in town, you have the opportunity to a comprehensive program that allows you to graduate with our standards, which are higher than the state standards. So, but I believe that currently exists. The equity piece, I think, really lies in the lack of a transparent process. So when I say equity for this particular situation, what I'm talking about is kids not really knowing the process. So if they wanted to access, for example, the Health Science Academy, based on their experience or based on their backgrounds or based on a number of different things, they may not understand how they do that. So I think there is an equity issue because of the lack of a clear process on transferring. So like I said, right now, 14% of our ninth graders said that they wanted to transfer, but did we really make that clear to all students that they had that option? I'm not sure about that, just because our process is not defined anywhere in terms of policy or procedure. So that's where I see the danger in the equity.
That's great. Thanks for that. And I think we have had some discussion about our incoming students from our K-8 partner districts really not understanding what the differences might be between the schools, and feeling a little bit startled by folks who had, chosen particular pathways and things. So I really appreciate the focus on communicating clear process around this for that perspective.
And Trustee Sturbis has a question.
Yeah, so my question is I think, unfortunately, a lot of kids transfer because of sports. And so I hope this policy will address that, because I think the priority should be academics if people want to transfer.
Yeah, thank you for that comment.
Is there any other questions or comments? Looking for hands up. I have a question or comment related, I think, to Trustee Decker's. So I know that Hellgate Elementary is the biggest feeder group into Big Sky. And although it's now been 9 years since my son was there, the information that was available 9 years ago was very limited about what options existed for students coming from that large population. And that would apply to other feeder schools, Target Range, I mean, all our feeder schools, Lolo, but that's a huge, I mean, it's continuing to grow and grow, so it's a huge population. And so is there a mechanism by which we can make sure that one of the 8th grade counselors or someone there maybe can be part of the process of identifying how to communicate to their students, and then we can use that model to communicate to the smaller feeder schools as well. But that's a huge population coming in from Hellgate Elementary. So is there a way to make sure that they're part of the communication connections?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I've had this discussion, a similar discussion that we're having this evening. I've had this discussion with my advisory groups, which include certified, classified, and parents. But what you got me thinking about, Trustee Holland, is that I don't know if I've really had the discussion with our rural, with our incoming K-8 schools like Target Range and Hellgate Elementary. So I'm sure that they would also have a perception on this transfer process, and that's a piece that I hadn't thought of until now. So I think that's a good point, is making sure not only they're involved on the front end with the development of this process, but also on the other end, once it's developed, and how we communicate it to parents is critical.
Yeah, I think I talk to parents who have kids out here, especially, well, everywhere. I mean, every grade level, but especially middle school. And they would really appreciate having some information from MCPS about things like that. Any other questions from anybody? Not seeing any hands go up. It's information only, but is there any public comment on this agenda item? I'm just looking to see if there's any hands.
Not seeing any from my end, Marcia.
And I didn't see any either. So thank you for that information, Dr. Watson, and I know that we'll be revisiting it again once there's some more specifics developed. So thank you for starting this process out. Now we'll move on to B1, which is to approve the personnel report. It's found beginning on page 32. This is a routine report that we usually see every month, or usually every month. Dave, is there anything you'd like to point out about it that is, of note that you'd like to draw our attention to?
There's nothing particular that stands out. It's actually a very small report.
I did notice that. So the recommendation is that there's a motion to approve the items on the provided personnel report that is found beginning on page 32. Is there a motion to do so? It was moved by Trustee Wake. And is there a second? Let me see if there's a second. Seconded by Trustee Oldperson. Is there any board discussion? And just a caution, we don't talk about any particular individual in the report. It would be a general discussion. Not seeing any hands go up, and people are already voting, even though I didn't ask for votes yet, but yay, you want to vote. I need to take public comment first, so I'll assume that we can go back, and Pro Tunc, and I can get all the yes votes. Is there any public comment on the personnel report? And again, it would be general comment, not anything as to a specific individual. Okay. So now I will assume I'll count votes that were pre-voted and votes that are voted now. So if you're in favor of the motion to approve the personnel report, type in yes or Y, and I'll go back and it appears that it's unanimous as to all trustees present, so the motion passes. And then we move on to B2, which is to repeal policy 3330 and procedure 3330P. And it looks like, Pat, you're going to explain why we don't even know why this policy was ever generated. And so in your review of policies, if you want to explain why you're recommending that we repeal the policy.
You bet. Thanks, Chair Holland. So the almost the discovery of this policy and procedure was by virtue of a pretty innocent request by assistant principals to look at some changes to the athletic schedule. So the participation numbers suggested to our assistant principals in the middle school that we look at joining the Copper League, which is a league in Missoula County surrounding middle school schools, and also move our volleyball program from the winter to the fall to align with volleyball programs really throughout the state and the high school, and among other middle school programs for purposes of participation. And so we found this policy and the attached procedure that were adopted about 17 years ago, and really address items that are set forth in the middle school handbook, which is a pretty extensive handbook. It's about 32 pages long, and our assistant principals were working on some updates and enhancements to that handbook when we talked about this policy and the attached procedure. The main conflict in the policy and the procedure are the restriction of participation to schools that are Missoula County public schools. And, that's the primary issue with both the policy and the procedure. But in reviewing it, it really was questionable why we would have a policy, an attached procedure to the policy of this nature. And in talking with our attorney, she also wasn't sure why we would have this. And when we talked about revisions to be consistent with the handbook, what made more sense was repealing the policy and the procedure altogether. And so that's our recommendation to the board. I know that Russ Hendrickson and Alana Van Epps are two of our middle school principals are also here on this call and available to answer questions or provide any additional feedback.
Any questions for either Pat or, I see we have a vice principal and some principals at the meeting virtually. Any questions? Looking for hands. So I do have a question, Pat. So if I can restate it, and as I look at the policy, it looks like it's pretty much in the weeds in terms of the kind of things that we would never include in policy, like what kind of shoes wear, or even in procedures, gym shoes, whatever that is defined as. And so the recommendation is that can be covered by including that information in the middle school handbooks, because it's much more flexible to make changes to respond to differing or new situations in the handbooks than it would be to adopt a policy or even modify procedures. Is that generally the case?
Yeah, that's exactly correct, and it certainly allows the assistant principals the ability to create a consistent handbook that isn't in conflict with what might be out there as adopted policy and procedure. So,
and I see that Trustee Service has a question.
Yeah, so this would allow MCPS to join the Copper League then?
That's the plan of the assistant principals, is to schedule to participate in the Copper League, and the existing policy and procedure wouldn't allow it, essentially.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions for Pat or the assistant or principals? Assistant principals or principals? Just looking to see any hands are raised. I don't see any. So the recommendation is that there is a motion to repeal board policy 3330. And does it take board action to repeal procedure 3330P since somehow it ended up in our policy manual?
I think the only reason is because it's referenced and, but it may have been adopted. I was just covering our basis since it had a link to the policy.
Okay, so in the abundance of caution, in case that it would take board action because board action was taken on the procedure, although the board doesn't normally adopt procedures, administration does. Is there a motion to repeal board policy 3330 and procedures 3330P? And Trustee Smith has made the motion, and it's been seconded by Trustee Sturbis. Is there any board discussion? Not seeing any hands up. Is there any public comment? Not seeing any. So all trustees in favor of the motion, please type in yes so that I can count the number of trustees voting and their votes. Sorry, it just takes a minute to count. I'm not seeing Trustee McDonald. Has she left the meeting, Hatton?
Just scanning down to see, she is still in the meeting. I don't see her comments in chat though.
You voted yes. It's
Oh, yep, she is up there at 7:50. Thank you.
I still don't see her. I will take your word for it because I'm just not seeing it.
Yep.
So with that being clarified, then it's unanimous as to all trustees present. And thanks for bringing this forward, Pat. Appreciate it. And
yeah, thank you.
On to C, board topics. And number 1 is the Montana School Board Association proposed amendments to resolutions. There is a document attached to the agenda, and it's a little confusing to say the least. So I might be putting Trustee Wake on the spot, but Trustee Wake, can you kind of address generally what the thinking, what the general thought process is for the delegate assembly that we're going to be, at least some of us are going to be attending on Thursday? And I don't see Trustee Wake unmuting her phone. So for the those trustees who have forgotten or new trustees, generally I'll try to.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, we can hear you now. Thanks, Trustee Wake.
I'm sorry. I got too many things going on here because my speaker doesn't always work on my computer. So I have my phone on and my computer on. Okay. What I was saying was is that on Thursday they're having an annual meeting. It's not a delegate assembly. And they're going to review all of the resolutions that were approved at delegate assembly this past October. They've combined some of the resolutions, and it's all in the best interest of all the schools in the state. And then they will go forward from there, and at delegate assembly in the fall, they will proceed to review what the language of the bill might look like. So, and this is all weighted voting, so if you have any changes that you want to make, that Thursday would be the time to do it. Do you have any other questions?
No.
I know it's really confusing. Hello? Hello?
We can hear, I can hear you. I think everyone else can too.
Oh, do you have any questions?
I guess my only comment is more for the trustees, and I didn't realize it's the annual meeting as opposed to the delegate assembly. but several of the trustees attended the delegate assembly last fall.
October.
4 of us were there, where multiple resolutions were brought forward. And then it looks like MTSBA has looked at them and combined several of them. The way it typically works at the annual meeting, and correct me if I'm wrong, Trustee Wake, is that they will be discussed again. It's possible that there will be modifications made to them. And then typically there's a vote on whether, as a member of the MTSBA, each individual trustee who's present can vote to support the resolution, not support the resolution. And also there's a second category of whether it's an action item for MTSBA to actively lobby for, or whether there's support for it, but it doesn't necessarily have to require active lobbying. Have I generally explained that properly?
That is all correct.
Okay. And so I think I'm signed up. I'm guessing Trustee Wake will be at the annual meeting on Thursday. It begins at 1. And Trustee Olperson, did you sign up for it too? Okay. There will be 3 of us representing MCPS at the meeting. And because it's a bit of a fluid process, there are sometimes amendments that are made at the meeting. So what we wanted to do, Dr. Watson and I wanted to do, was to bring generally the concepts that will be being discussed at the MTSBA annual meeting on Thursday, and see if any trustees have any concerns or considerations or points that you want to point out. I know Trustee Decker last year before the October meeting brought forth several points that we were able to carry forward to the meeting and got clarification on. So we appreciate those kinds of comments or insights from individual trustees for those of us who will be at the meeting. So any comments? I'm not seeing any hands up. So that means that Trustee Wake, Trustee Olperson, and I will be representing MCPS at the meeting on Thursday, and at some point we can report back as to any action taken at that meeting. And so this is information only. And so I'll throw it open for public comment, but not seeing any. Then we move on to public comment on non-agenda items, which we provide an opportunity for at the beginning and end of every meeting, just in case someone's schedule doesn't allow them to attend either the beginning of the meeting. So any public comment at this point?
Chair Holland, can I just make a quick comment?
Sure.
So Chair Holland and I have discussed this briefly, but I think our desire was to try to move back into in-person meetings, perhaps as early as the second board meeting in June, which is June 23rd. And we'd like to take a portion of that meeting to invite our district attorney, Biakalova, to give the annual trustee orientation and training. So, but I think the reason I'm bringing it up now is, I guess if you have any concerns about moving to in-person meetings, just please share that with Trustee Holland so we can make a decision on that meeting for the 23rd.
And you stole my thunder, Dr. Watson, because that was how I was going to close the meeting out, was by commenting that I hope that we actually get to all see each other at the next board meeting. But obviously, if anyone has any concerns about attending in person, we have always made accommodations for trustees to appear by telephone, and we can probably make accommodations for trustees to appear virtually as well. But we do hope that we can, under the current phase 2 guidelines, that we can meet in person following appropriate protocol to make sure that everyone is safe. And so, as Dr. Watson indicated, contact me if you have any concerns or considerations about doing so, and any thoughts about how the room should be configured or anything like that. I spoke with Lenora, and she indicated that she was going to pass along to Tracy. I talked to Lenora today that I'll be happy to come over to the boardroom and work with staff to take a look at the room and make sure everything appears appropriately in following protocol by Missoula City County Health and the Phase 2 directives. So.
Trustee Holland,
I see Trustee Service has a question, but there's not really a place for questions at the end of the meeting. Do you want to call me with your question, Trustee Service?
Well, I was just curious how you're going to have the public attend the meeting, that's all.
Right. Why don't you just give me a call and we can discuss that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And so with that, I'll adjourn the meeting. All for being here, and thanks for your patience.